Okay, so in this video I won't be talking about the usual stoicism stuff or any of the ancient philosophers or anything like that. Instead, what I'm going to be talking about is this change in perspective that is going to help you see the world and yourself a little bit more clearly and to help you see how to make better decisions in general. Okay, so what is this change in perspective? It's called long-term thinking. Yeah, so what even is long-term thinking, and what do I mean by it, and what does it have to do with anything? So long-term thinking is very similar to the stoic exercise of zooming out, but it's not quite the same thing. And if you don't know what zooming out is, I've made a video about it before. I'll link it in the description. It'll be in the top right-hand corner. But the basic idea of zooming out is looking at your life and seeing your problems in comparison to all the problems and all the lives of all the people on the earth. So, like, instead of thinking that your problems are special individually, you can see that everybody has problems, some worse than yours, and many just as bad as yours. And to see that there are many people out there who would gladly trade their lives for yours because their problems are way worse compared to what you have to deal with. So with the idea of thinking long term, it's pretty much like zooming out, but instead of zooming out through space, you're zooming out through time, like a timeline, and seeing that the problems that you have are not that big of a deal because, like 1 week from now, 1 month from now, maybe 1 year from now, you aren't going to be remembering any of the difficulties, frustrations, or problems that you have right now. Like for example, go back 1 year from this exact date. Right now, for me, it's November 23rd, 2019. So I should go back to November 23rd of 2018. So what do I remember about that day? What did I do? What were the problems I had? I don't remember. I don't know. It's not relevant anymore. So I can even expand to the entire week of November 24th, 2018, and I still would have no clue what I did. I don't know what my problems were. Those are all so far in the past that they no longer matter. And it's probably the same situation for you. So then, if that is what long-term thinking is, then what is short-term thinking? Well, it's exactly the opposite of this. So let's say you're giving a presentation or a speech in front of a big group of people, and you're really nervous, and in the middle of the speech, you might struggle to remember your words, and you stumble over, your speech. Eventually, you remember what the words were, and you continue. But in that single moment, you feel extremely awkward, and you think to yourself like, "Oh, that was terrible," and you start to sweat and feel even more nervous. But fast forward like 3 months from that speech, are you still thinking about that time when you stuttered, when you gave a speech? Are you still even thinking about that speech at all? The most likely answer to that would be no. That mistake that you made 3 months ago is so irrelevant and so unimportant that it doesn't even matter anymore. Like, you probably wouldn't even remember that you even made that mistake. In your mind, 3 months later, that speech that you made went perfectly fine. So short-term thinking can also be about choosing instant gratification over long-term fulfillment and accomplishment. So it's like choosing to play video games because it's more fun at the moment than going to the gym, which isn't fun while you're doing it, but is extremely beneficial in the long run, and it's fun for you later. Okay, so why should you start thinking long-term? To start, like I explained, you can make more mistakes without feeling bad about them. You can make very little progress without feeling discouraged because you're thinking long term. Here's a quote from Seneca actually. A gem cannot be perfected without friction. This right here shows that you can't learn skills, you can't grow or change for the better without running into all sorts of mistakes. Mistakes are just kind of there. They're a reality of life. They won't go away and they never will. Even if you have years of experience, practice, thousands of hours of training, you will still run into mistakes because no one is perfect and you don't have to be. But if we go back to thinking short term, yes, in the short term, any mistake that you make is kind of a big deal. And it might be a little bit embarrassing or humiliating, but in the long term, if you made a little mistake on some random day, does it really matter anymore? Like, in fact, that mistake that you made can help you improve because you can choose to learn from it instead of feeling embarrassed because of it. So you see, long-term thinking is very, very beneficial. All of a sudden, everything is much less stressful. You become less of a perfectionist, and instead, you focus on taking action, which is another important topic. I might go into that later in another video. But the point is, thinking long-term will loosen the pressure that you have to be a perfect person. Because you don't have to be. You know, things will fall apart, and that's just the nature of it. Instead, if you think short-term, you may tell yourself that by improving 1% is not enough. Wait a minute. In his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear mentions the idea of the 1% rule, which, tells you to improve in some way, it doesn't matter, by only 1% every single day. Of course, you can't actually measure the fact that you grew by 1%, but this helps you visualize the idea of what long-term thinking really means. Because by the end of just one single year, if you improve by just 1% every day, you would be about 37 times better at the end of that 1 year. This shows that even if you made tiny bits of progress every day over the long term, you would see huge benefits, and you would be much better at the end of that year than you were at the beginning. Even if you messed up, made mistakes, or progressed very slowly, if you think long term, all of these factors won't matter. But if we go back, instead if you think short term, you may tell yourself that improving by 1% is not enough. You may beat yourself up for not improving fast enough. You might get frustrated for making these mistakes, or for not making enough progress on a given day or week. And because of this frustration, you might even quit whatever you were trying to accomplish. So, just to sum things up, thinking long-term changes your perspective on a massive scale. If you think long-term, any mistake that you make now becomes very insignificant, and you can easily brush it off and have it not affect you. If you think long-term, instead of being frustrated or disappointed by the mistakes that you make, you can learn from them through the desire to improve.